Hello, I'm Brad Smith and welcome to Unit 6 of Supply Chain Management, Sourcing. So this week we look at a very important aspect of the supply chain, sourcing of the raw materials, the components that organisations need to produce their product and service for delivery to the marketplace. The first thing an organisation has to think about when it thinks about sourcing is, are they going to produce the product in-house or are they going to outsource? So we look at some fundamental tools that an organisation can use to start to help them make this decision. When Henry Ford first set up his famous Model T assembly line at the turn of the century, he recognised that the only way he was going to get his assembly line to work the way he wanted it to work was if he made just about all of the products and the components that he required in-house. So Henry Ford actually owned iron ore mines where he mined the ore. He owned the steel mills that made the steel and pressed the panels. He owned timber plantations where he would chop down the wood, sawmills to produce the floorboards. He owned rubber plantations and made the rubber for the tyres. And only by owning all of these and producing them in-house did he recognise that he would be able to keep the assembly line going at the speed that he wanted it to run at. If we fast forward 100 years, now we find an organisation like Apple, all they do is manage the in-house design of the product and the software, but all of the manufacture of the product is outsourced to large organisations in Asia that produce the product for them. So there's been a fundamental shift in this area of sourcing. Outsourcing, of course, has its own pros and cons. Often there are other organisations that can produce the raw materials, the components that you need much more efficiently than you can do it in-house. So it makes sense to outsource those products, those services to those organisations. However, the downside of that can be that you lose control of those components and those services that you need. The ethical and sustainable sourcing is becoming increasingly a key concern. At the time of shooting this video, a large factory in Bangladesh that made clothing products had collapsed and 1,100 employees were killed. This really turned a spotlight onto the organisations that were using these workers, using the companies that operated within this factory to buy their clothing at very, very cheap prices. And it really made people question just how important is it that we buy products at these very low prices versus the concerns that people had for the welfare of these workers. If we use the concept that the supply chain ultimately has to maximise the value for all participants in the supply chain, then one can start to question just how much value are these workers getting from the supply chain, and how sustainable is it over the long term that we buy the products from these areas at the prices and under the conditions that these people were working. So there's lots of questions there to think about as we talk about this topic of sourcing. It's a very interesting area of supply chain management, and I'm sure you'll enjoy this unit. We'll see you in Unit 7.